Shalom everybody, Daniel from Ancient Biblical Oils and Ancient Biblical Healing. Hope you all well today and having an awesome day. I just thought I'd get on here and make a quick video on the topic of head coverings for men. Right? Why? Because my beautiful wife Sarah, she has a Telegram group called YHVH Sarah. Right? It's a group that she developed a couple of weeks ago, and in that group she's been sharing her life story and encouraging women to become like their mother Sarah. YHVH Sarah is the title of a Torah portion, and it basically means the life of Sarah, or Chaye can mean a command to live like Sarah, which basically is what we see in the text, where it is that believing women are told to emulate their mother and be like their mother. Okay, so anyway, in this group, there was a question that came up to say, why does Daniel wear a head covering if it seems that the New Testament says that a man shouldn't have his head covered when he's praying or prophesying? So, awesome question. Can't get into all the details today, right? I'm going to do an actual in-depth teaching on the idea of head coverings for both males and females. Look out for that. But I just want to touch on this idea quickly. Okay. Now, first and foremost, the thing that we need to understand is the only thing that can separate you from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is sin. That's the only thing. Nothing else can separate you from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The only thing he does not want you to do is sin. Okay? So that is an awesome thing to understand, because it's very simple to then define what sin is. Right? From an Israelite perspective, which is our perspective, sin is transgression of the Torah, right? Which is the writings of Moses, Genesis through to Deuteronomy. That's the actual law. If you break the law, you sin. Right? Now, the New Testament confirms this understanding. It says, for sin is the transgression of nomos, which is the Greek translated from the Hebrew word Torah. What is Torah? Technically speaking, it is the writings of Moses, Genesis through to Deuteronomy. Right now, I'm not going to go into that whole discussion right now, because we don't have the time to actually go down that route. So basically, that means as long as you're not breaking any rules within the Torah, you are not sinning. And therefore, you can't disappoint the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the Messiah. Okay? So in there, we don't see any instruction with regards to forbidding men having any sort of head covering. In fact, we see the opposite, where it is that we see that the men who it is that actually work in the house of the great king, in the actual tabernacle and temple, are commanded to have a head covering while it is that they're serving the king. Right? So what is the service of the temple? That is the actual ultimate expression of worship, prayer, singing, prophesying, sacrifice, etc., etc. It's the ultimate expression of worship. And the men who it is that lead or practice the ultimate expression of worship 24/7 are commanded to have their heads covered at all times. Okay? So we need to understand that every single writing that makes up the Bible is based on top of the Torah, on top of Moses, right? That's the reason why it is that in Isaiah 8 verse 20, Isaiah basically says, if they do not speak according to the law, which is Moses, and to the testimony, they have no light. Right? Everyone has to speak according to what Moses said. If they speak outside of what Moses said, then what it is that they said is invalid. So we need to understand that the New Testament writers are speaking within that frame of mind and speaking to people who have that frame of mind. That's why the people are checking daily to see if what Paul said is actually true. What do they check? They can't check Paul's writings to confirm what Paul says. They have to be checking Old Testament, specifically the Torah. So the reason why it is then Paul is speaking to Timothy. He says to Timothy, the scripture that must be used for correction and doctrine and for salvation in belief in Messiah is the scripture Timothy had as a child, which is definitely not Paul's writings, right, or any other writings from the New Testament. It is the Old Testament, and specifically the Torah, because sin is the only thing that can separate you from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So when Paul now mentions this idea of head covering, Paul is speaking in line with what the Torah has said. So Paul can't be saying that the priests are sinning, because if he said that, then whoever was reading his message would simply turn to the Torah and they would see the head coverings on the priests, and then they would chuck Paul out of the synagogue. Rightly so, right? They would even take him to court and they would rightly convict him of sin. And we see that that doesn't happen. So the unfortunate thing with Paul's writings, that we've been warned to say, be careful of Paul's writings, because there's difficult things in there, that those who are unlearned, right? Unlearned in what? The legal system of the kingdom, which is what? Torah law, will not understand what Paul is actually speaking about. Right? So Paul speaks of high and lofty, mysterious things. And on top of that, not only is he speaking high and lofty things, when we're reading Paul's letters, we're only reading a response and we don't know what the question was. Now, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree that if you actually have to just read any response without knowing what the question is, it would be very difficult to actually come to a true understanding of what the conversation's about. So anyway, in the text, 1 Corinthians 11 verse 4, we see that Paul says a man shouldn't have his head covered when prophesying. So next major issue is translation. Okay, so the word covered there is kata. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, right? It's G2596. For those who it is a strong concordance, just go into a strong concordance, G2596, kata. Now this word is used in the New Testament 378 times. And when I'm looking on my resource that I have, it's not used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is very, very interesting. Because then that would help us in that we could just simply go to the Old Testament of the Greek and see where this word is used, and then see what Hebrew words it was used to translate, and that would give us better understanding. But the fact that it's not used in this form in the Old Testament makes it more difficult for us to actually pinpoint what this word actually means. Okay, so anyway, it's used 378 times. The major use is translated into the English accordingly 109 times. It's translated to the English after 65 times, again 60 times, daily 17 times, every 17 times, at 8 times, privately 8 times, throughout 8 times, apart 7 times, covering 5 times, though 5 times, godly 4 times, on 4 times. And we carry on going through the list of 3 times. I don't know how many times it goes 3 times. There's like maybe 54 different English words that it's translated into. And it's only translated as covered once. And it's in that text with Paul. So just for us to get an understanding, this word is in the New Testament 378 times. Translated all sorts of different ways. The majority has got nothing to do with any sort of covering, right? Like maybe 300 and something times is just like random words. Only once of the 378 times is it used to mean covered. Right, now when you click on the actual word in that text, it will say something that's like hanging down. And I heard a teaching a couple of years ago where the person that was giving this understanding on the text was saying it seemed as if the men might have had some practice, he says probably pagan practice, of having a veil over their faces while it is that being in worship. And this veiling of the face was something which it is that women did. Now, unfortunately, that's all just speculation, because like I said, we don't have the actual questions that were posed to Paul. Right? But regardless, just coming back to the idea of head coverings, I'm sure we would all agree, right? The Torah witness is that the men who it is that prophesied and worshipped 24/7, they had head coverings on the whole time by commandment of Jehovah. From a cultural perspective, everyone in the Middle East wore head coverings, women and men. Why? There's lots of cultural ideas. We've got to unpack like the spiritual ideas, which are like really, really massive and exciting, of why it is that head coverings were used. And then just from an environmental perspective, you had to have head covering. If you didn't have a head covering in that environment, you wouldn't last very long. Okay, so Torah law, we see the priests commanded to have the head covered while doing the highest form of worship. From a cultural perspective, we see everyone with their heads covered. And then we have this text with this word used that is used 378 times in the Bible. Right? It is only translated as covered once out of 378. And on top of that, Paul's writings are not halacha sefer. They are not legal documents. The only thing which it is that is legal and binding with regards to sin is that which it is that is found in the Torah. Okay, so I hope that was interesting. It was supposed to be short, and it's probably gone a lot longer than I wanted it to go. 10 minutes. That's crazy. I haven't said anything. But anyway, look out for the future teaching, because the future teaching is going to dive into the spiritual ideas around head covering. And that's exciting. Why? Because we need to realize that the language and culture of Israel, of our fathers, is derived from heaven. Right? The Hebrew is the language of creation. Our fathers didn't just have a culture. The culture was given to them from Jehovah, which means their culture came from heaven. Right? It's a divinely inspired culture. And therefore, within the practices of the culture, the practices themselves are of divine origin and therefore powerful. Okay, I hope that sinks in. The culture itself is divinely inspired, and therefore the practices are powerful. Right? And I'll unpack that for you guys soon, Jehovah willing. We'll dive deep into the idea of turbans. For those of you who it is that have seen the prayer meditation seminar that we've going to be putting online soon, I touch on head coverings there. Go and check that out. But I'm going to do an even deeper one in a couple of weeks' time. All right. This was supposed to be short. It ended up being like 12 minutes. Blessings for your day. Shalom.